Maya Condios? What? Oh, good, excellent. I've not been doing my homework. I'm way behind. Karen's doing it for both of us. As if that's a viable thing. Okay, let's go ahead and get started here. See, believe me, it's happened before. I am recording, so we're set. We left off talking about Akhenaten, who you remember inherited the throne under a different name, Amenhotep IV, and decided radically to change the traditional religion of ancient Egypt to a monotheistic religion, monotheistic one God. So all of that confusion about the different gods that we had sort of encountered in class was overthrown by him in lieu of still worshiping the sun. It's still important to them. But the sun is now often and represented as a single disk, not as an animal-human hybrid thing. And thus he has to change his name from Amenhotep to Akhenaten, the servant of Aten. This is a rather radical thing. It's also radical in that it's the very first monotheistic religion anywhere in the world. This is the earliest recorded monotheistic religion, well in advance of Judeo-Christian traditions. Right? So it's on the record there as worshiping a single God. And what we were talking about is that going hand in hand with this radical shift in theology comes a radical shift in the style of art that was done for him. That most Egyptian art had looked very, very similar. Stylistically, there was very little change through the centuries with how Egyptian art looked. And with Akhenaten, we get something different that seems to go hand in hand with this new religion. And the difference is what we were talking about at the end of class, is sort of effeminate hips and thighs, the softer nature of flesh, the belly he has. He doesn't have that fitness that we saw in some of the younger or earlier pharaohs. Everything is rounded and softer and more rubber-like, plastic-like. And we see this in this relief on the left as well, where again he has entirely thin arms, unless he holds up these lotus flowers to often, again, the heavy swelling hips and thighs. His wife and daughters as well have this too, as they're making now offerings to Ra. So the style is drastically different from what came before. And I think this becomes clear as we look at earlier works from 1,000 years before, the standard for Egyptian art, which had toned musculature. They're still thin through the ribcage, you know? There's still some of that, but at the same time, he's changed to being significantly less muscular. And that's a hallmark of works of art that were done under Amenhotep. That, again, it ends more or less with his reign as well. So it seems to be something he instigated, asked his artists to do, so that the style of the works became symbolic itself, independent from what's depicted, how it's depicted. The style is equally symbolic of the fact that there has been a radical change in ancient Egypt. The Walton Art Museum has this, but it's never on display. But we see the same style in images of his family. This is one of his daughters, and she's got that, again, the sort of almond-shaped eyes, the much sort of rounded chin, the thicker lips and ears, and the swelling skull in the background that we saw in the relief as well. These are all hallmarks of works of art that were done during the time of Amenhotep and all of his family. Now, what's interesting about this is that the mummy of one of his relatives, when it was investigated by Egyptologists, actually did have an elongated skull in the back. So there may be something here where they're taking what was a family physical trait and turning it into a hallmark of the style, probably overemphasizing it, but using it as a touchstone. That said, it's worth mentioning, as we did last week, that in fact, like many pharaohs, the family of Amenhotep, Akhenaten, had inbred for generations. His great-great-great-grandmother and his great-great-great-grandfather were brother and sister, right? So he's inherited some incest. His parents were also siblings. So, I mean, there's generation on generation of inbreeding here, but it could have led to some of the physical deformities that we've seen when we excavated their mummies, and that the artist used as the basis for this new Akhenaten style. Right? That said, and the fact that it is kind of androgynous, right, is the female body elements on his image on the right, it's important to remember that, at least in Egyptian religion, Aten, right, the sun disk, is referred to as being both mother and father. Huh? Ah, really? Uh-huh. Cool. Uh-huh. Interesting. Thank you for that. I didn't know that. We'll see a great advertisement in a number of museums. Sleeping the famous Sleeping from Africa in the Plaza Massimo, which is right behind our hotel. So that makes sense that it's that. But I think there's also another side to me that we should consider, right? And realize that art isn't a photograph. Right? And that is, the thing that we should consider is that Aten, in the religious writings of Aten, calls Aten both father and mother at the same time. So if he's the servant of Aten, right, then is he taking on Aten's own characteristics as well? So it doesn't mean that he wasn't perhaps having hermaphroditic qualities, but that when it comes time to showing that art might mean something else, right? Because it doesn't have to look like he looks. So we should think again about what it might have been. Right? Well, one of our more famous works from this period is Akhenaten's wife, Nefertiti. We know the name of the sculptor Thutmose. And her parents are unknown, or they're unrecorded, so there's every chance she's not part of the same family. Right? She may not be part of the same inbred family tree. But she might. We don't know. Right? We have no proof one way or the other. At the same time, this more realistic and softer style that we see with Akhenaten, Amenhotep IV, we also see with her. It becomes less obvious because our artist here, Thutmose, has been able to turn it into a sort of image of elegance, of refinement. He hides, if he had an elongated skull, it's hidden inside of that wonderful crown. Right? And it seems to pick up some of that element but turn it into a decorative motif. The more we look at her, the more it's just a really stunningly beautiful piece. And as realistic as anything that we've seen in this class, as close to what we imagine portraiture might look like, as just about anything, she seems very much like an individual. This beauty for her was, I think, important because her name, Nefertiti, means beauty has arrived. Right? Beauty has come. And so, using the style that's typical of the time, which is this softer style that we saw in Akhenaten's statues, he's trying to bring out, I think, the fact that beauty has come. This is in plaster, and it's been painted, and the eyes are inset in a different material, and you can see them missing. But this was found excavated in the portraitist studio, along with a great number of other works. And that makes us think that what he probably did in making portraits of the wife of the pharaoh was to get her to sit for him once, make the drop-dead perfect version, so she doesn't bother her anymore. She's busy, And then when he needed to make other portraits of Nefertiti, he would use this as the basis for the secondary, the ones that need to be produced in multiple versions, right? Because you don't want to have her keep coming back in. And we're just fortunate in this case that the plaster one has survived, and it was survived along with a bunch of other ones, and it's easily the most realistic of the entire group. So that's our working theory, at least, for now. There she is from the side, and you can see how really quite elongated that neck is, but also how the skull still seems to swell quite a bit in the back, and gives you that sense that, like that portrait of her daughter, that she might too have had that skull swelling underneath her hat. But it's covered up by that wonderful crown that she wears, and ends up giving you this beautiful sort of 90-degree angle from her neck to her head that works just perfectly for her. It looks awkward on Akhenaten, ends up looking really good on her. Right? But it is basically the same style. Now, like I said, it was found along with a bunch of other ones in Tutmosis' studio, and here is one of the other versions of it where we think these are copied after this one, which served as the interim model, if you will, so that she wouldn't have to keep coming back to pose for these as he needed to make others. Well, Akhenaten's son changed the religion back. He was born Tutankhamun, and he went back to the old religion, changed his name to Tutankhamun. So it's a short-lived revolution in Egyptian religion, and arguably a short-lived revolution in the style. But I think as we look at the gold mask of King Tut, you can see some of that softness, some of that greater sense of portraiture that we saw with Akhenaten, continuing on here. That even though the revolution is over, some of the style is continuing. And that's probably because some of the artists that were working for his father continue to work for him as well. So that softer style remains. This particular work, the Death Mask of King Tut, and the Burial of King Tut, is something that's discussed in one of those 10-minute art fixes online, right? So rather than just repeat that here, I'm going to push you there as that bit of homework, right, is to make sure you play those back. And you'll find out more about it. And treat it like you do the classes where you take notes. And if anything comes up, please email me. But his burial is there, and it talks about how this mask fit on his mummy with the other parts of the burial that were uncovered in the 1920s and wound up in London. Right? Partly in Cairo, partly in London. This is excavated by a Brit. Right? The legacy of that softer style continues in later pharaohs immediately following Akhenaten. And here is Ramses II, one of the most powerful pharaohs in all of Egyptian history, loves to build on a massive scale. Here is a temple that's carved out of the live rock of the cliff, with 4 statues of Ramses flanking the doorway, 2 on either side. And you can see just how large they are by a sense of the stairway here, leading up and in. These are 65-foot statues on either side of Ramses II. Let's see what we have here. The softness of the body style you can see especially in this figure in the middle, directly above the door, which is a figure of Horus, wearing the Aten sun disk on his head, even though the religion has changed back. But you can see that that softer stomach, less muscular style continues here, well after the reign of Akhenaten. We have a statue of Ramses II up in the Walters Art Museum, which I thought I'd bring in as well, since I'm trying to focus on things you can go see here in the DC area. Ramses did make huge buildings, but they no longer made pyramids. They were burying their dead in caves. This particular temple, however, is a temple for the living. It's a temple for everyday life rather than a burial temple. And these are every bit as big as the pyramids once were. And you get a sense of that. I think here's the heads that have fallen off of them to get a ramp that leads in, just to give you an idea of the actual scale of these things. If you're interested in this, this is the pharaoh that is recounted in the book of Exodus as well. Ramses II is the one that holds Moses and the children of Israel captive, right? Yeah, I got pissed at it too. It was funny. He sent me a video of somebody climbing the pyramids, which is against the law. And there's a reason it's against the law. I know, but still, the laws apply to everybody. You know, and the reason they ban it is because, well, little do you know, it does have some damage. It improves over time. And if you go to the top of the pyramid, and I've not been. When I went there in the 80s, I think you could still climb them. That was like 81, right? A long time ago. And, but I didn't because I was a wuss. In any event, people have always carved their names up there when you get to the top. And that's part of the reason they cut it off, is that people were like, Kilroy was here, right? And they want to make sure that people aren't going to do stupid things, right? So they make it illegal. They should have locked them up. But it was a good view, wasn't it, from the top? Yeah? That you said. So anyway, somebody climbed it and took a GoPro video of it. Right? Yeah. Yeah, because you have to sort of jump. I mean, they're like this tall, you know? Not an easy job. And I think with that last video, the last shot, you could also see how the Great Pyramid is significantly taller than Khafre's one in the middle, right? Because you're looking down on it from up on top. Right? Is your hand up, or is this just me? I want to make sure I'm not ignoring you, right? I want to wrap up kind of where we began, and that's with burial practices, right? Because there's this wonderful coffin down in the Smithsonian Natural History Museum from a bit later. This is our last work of Egyptian art. This idea of burial, the Egyptian idea of burial was to nest coffins. So you would be buried with a mask inside one coffin that would be nested inside of a different coffin that would then be put inside the sarcophagus, the stone house, and then buried, right? That was part of the practice, was to like Russian dolls, put them inside one another. And when we think about King Tut, it's pretty spectacular. It's 3 nested gold coffins, plus the mask on his head, plus 4 nested gold roofs. I mean, it's crazy, right? So here, not quite as swanky as that, an aristocratic burial which shows 2 wooden coffins that are nested inside each other. And this was, in fact, the norm. Tet Khonsu is a woman. This is her portrait on the outside of it, and various other hieroglyphs. And we'll look at a few of those because they give us some further insight, into Egyptian burial practices. So the lid of the inner coffin, this is what we're looking at here, is her portrait, and that's the norm, just like we saw with King Tut a second ago. And it's carved wood, which has been covered with a gesso that raises certain parts of the surface, and then it's been painted. And the paintings on the walls, which decorate not only the fronts, but the sides of the walls and the insides of the walls, and the bottom of it too, right? All of that's covered with a series of pictures that are meant to be read in sequence. And what they end up showing us is her journey from this life to the afterlife. And I'm not going to go through every one of them. There are like 6 scenes per wall that talk about how she got from here to the other side. And they reflect for us this Egyptian idea of the meeting of the spiritual world and the physical world, how they're really quite intertwined. That the moving from one side to the other isn't necessarily, it's not just a here or there. They're kind of both here, if you will. So this one, I tried to think of this. It's a low light at the Smithsonian. It's so bad. But I went to their website and I got one of their pictures. This is not a lot better, but in black and white you can really see it. This is Anubis, who is the embalmer of the dead. And what he's doing, he's sort of here in the middle, he's weighing parts of her heart in one of the pans of that scale. He's put her heart. And on the other pan is what's called the feather of truth, right? If the heart and the feather are in balance, right, if the heart weighs the same as the feather of truth, then you're free to go. You're going to go to the afterlife. No further judgment, right? And what happens here is we see the weighing, and there's out from here, and she's like, I get it, right? I'm out of here. I'm going to make it to the afterlife. No further travail or judgment for me. So that's her depicted there as Nubis in the center is now weighing her soul. Right? So that's part of this idea of translating off over. If we look at the coffin floor, and here these came out a bit better. The sky goddess, don't worry too much about this, the sky goddess of the West, right, is actually embracing the mummy as it welcomes her into the land of the dead. Right? So there's an idea that when you die, you're actually welcomed by the gods, you join them and commune with them for all time. And so there's a concept of being embraced by these birds' wings that are bringing her in. And on the inside here, on the right-hand side, we see, again, Anubis is up here. Yeah. And he's preparing the mummy. He's putting the mummy. No, it's just here. Anubis is preparing the mummy for the afterlife down below. So again, it's all about this idea of her being translated into the afterlife, and that narrative being shown on the actual burial artifact. So we're going to shift from here to Greece, where we're going to spend quite a bit of time there. But we want to look at Greek art because there's a significant amount of Greek art in Rome for us to see, and a lot of the things that are on your resident expert assignment are works of Greek art. The earliest civilization associated with Greece was on the Cycladic Islands, the Cyclades Islands. And so we historians refer to it as the Cycladic period. And the principal art that came from these people on those islands off the coast of Greece were these sorts of things: small idols, figurines, mostly women, a few men, but mostly women. Right? And very stylized, very abstract, not particularly realistic, like this one we see in the Walters. And we'll see two or three of these before we move to some later civilizations. The people who are living here on the Cycladic Islands, anthropologists have determined, migrated here from Asia Minor, from modern-day Turkey, Anatolia region. Right? So they've moved here from somewhere else and brought some of their ideas with them. Now that said, the Walters has this fertility figure that came from Anatolia. And it's pretty small, right? It's that big, right? Yeah, it's tiny. It's in the palm of your hand, okay? And this was produced by the Neolithic people in Anatolia. And you can see that some of that has moved over, hasn't it? But a lot of it's been left behind, right? So the pose is the same, the arms across the ribcage, one on top of the other. Right? The breasts pronounced, the very, very long neck. But that said, other things have changed. It's much more angular, the Cycladic figurine. It's much more geometrical, the Cycladic figurine. So some things have changed drastically. Other things have stayed the same. And I think what's happened here is our people from Anatolia have brought their practices with them, and on the Greek islands where they're carving marble, right, different material than this limestone that we have here, have translated into something very, very different. Marble is abundant in this region, and we have quite a few of these figurines around the region. Right? This was down in Richmond at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. Another of these Socratic figurines, and you see how similar they all very much are. Now, the abstract nature of them, where there's nothing really but a nose and a geometric head, there's nothing but the outlines of the arms, legs. This would have been augmented originally because each of these figures would have been painted. Some of them have traces of different colors that painted them, so they were highly decorative. And this is true for most ancient sculpture, particularly marble sculpture. We tend to look at marble sculptures as it's a wonderful thing. You know, marble is beautiful, it's a crystalline. But in ancient societies, marble was simply the basis for paint, whether it was on a building or otherwise. And these works have all been polychrome, brightly colored. The original meaning of these is unknown. We have some guesses, some possibilities. Some people think they might be fertility figures. We have, for example, the pelvic region emphasized. The vagina is emphasized each one. The breasts are small, but they're there. And the arms underneath them seem to emphasize them. Are they fertility figures? That's a distinct possibility. But you'll notice looking at each of these that they have a whole lot of trouble standing up. Both of these are set into supports in the museum that hold them upright because they can't stand up on their own. And the majority of them were found, I'll give you a second chance. The majority of them were found in graves, laying down. So what we think is that they were intended as some part of the burial ritual. We don't know exactly what. Are they like Egyptian figures that are a home for the soul that lives on? Or something entirely different? The bottom line is, the Socratic people have no writing that has survived. It's a prehistoric community. Right? So we can't go back and say, well, they said it was this, they said it was that. The society was basically wiped out around 1300 BC. No records are left, and we're left to guess. Genesis.
This figure right here.
Yeah. On the left.
Does it have some type of like dimension to its work? Because it looks like its arms are crossed at the same time. It looks like there's one arm coming down and one coming across.
So there's one here. There's one here, and then one comes down over here. This bit here? That's just the color. I think it's just coloration of the marble, but it could also be a stain from the paint. Right? We'll see later that some of the other cultures in this region had interesting wardrobes. And I think we saw that with ancient Sumerian stuff too, didn't we? We saw this across here, oddly. So that, I believe, remember these are carved out natural stone, and marble always has veining, right? But that could be that as well. But the actual carved things are what you see right through here, and right through there, right? That's the actual carved lines. And most of these carved lines, I think, though I don't know for sure, but I think that many of the carved lines are the outlines for the coloring as well. So you notice that each of them has a really strong line around the neck as well, right? As I think as outlines for the coloring too. Right? I've got another one here. This gives you another sense too, by the way, of what they look like. That's this, and this is the museum support, north, right? But when we're looking at them, they're incredibly, it's like a skipping stone or something, you know? They're really stylized. So you're quite a bit abstracted, and they're not really carved fully in the round, if you get my meaning. There's no attempt of making it look like a body was seen from the side. It really is kind of meant to be seen from the front. Although on the back, they carved that joint between the thigh and the calf, right? But just as a bust, yeah. But as a single line, everything has been abstracted and sort of geometricized, you know. So, I just wanted to give you that as well. It's also worth noting here, here's one, this one's in your textbook, and it too has that veining that comes across that you're just asking for, right? And I've not seen this one in person, right? And I've not seen a different picture of it from this. But I don't know if that's paint or if that's natural rock. I just can't tell you. Right? And I'll go back to Richmond Mountain. Let me see if I can get my nose into it a bit closer. But from the three that we've seen, you can tell how really quite redundant in a way they are, these Cycladic figurines. And the vast majority are women taking this very pose. They rarely do anything else. The few men that we see, and this is totally Greek, sorry, I don't mean some roots in Greek, but ancient Greek. The few men that we see actually get to do something. Like some of them are playing harps or other musical instruments. But the women just stand there. And ancient Greek society was pretty misogynist. I think maybe on seeing some of that here. It's worth noting that we're not very far from Egypt here, and the general outline of the figure and the way in which the pelvic region has been emphasized here harkens back to Egyptian art as well. And they're both roughly the same time frame, so it's hard to say that it's harkening back. It could be this cross-fertilization of cultures through trade, through shipping. That there's no reason to assume that our Cycladic people had no contact with the Egyptians or vice versa. I can't tell you where it started, but I think the visual evidence is strong enough that there must be some back and forth going on here. Now, from the Cycladic islands, there was a migration to the larger island of Crete. Around 2700 BC, we already begin to see this migration very early on. And on the island of Crete, they developed writing, unlike the Cycladic islands. There's no writing from the smaller islands, but there is writing on the island of Crete. A lot of it has not been translated yet. But the name of the writing, just in case you didn't know this, is called Linear A. There's a later version called Linear B. And remember that in Mesopotamia we had cuneiform. In Egypt we have hieroglyphs, right? Each of these cultures has a different kind of writing. And the culture seems to have reached its height around the year 1700. And on the island of Crete there were 5 major palaces. And none of them are highly fortified, which makes us think that they were at peace with each other. They saw no immediate threat. And probably the ocean helped an awful lot with that, because you could see any threats that might be coming from the outside. But the palace remains primarily open. No gateways to keep out invaders. They must have thought that there weren't any. All of these seem to have been destroyed, however, at exactly the same time, or roughly the same time, around 1300 BC. They all seem to have been destroyed, leaving only ruins from later Greek civilizations. And these ruins that were left, in particular this set at Knossos, were probably the basis for later Greek mythology. Because when the Greeks looked back at these ruined civilizations, they basically made up stories about them. What really happened here? Right? And this building in particular, the Palace at Knossos, which you can see is just below my arrow right there, was probably the basis for the myth of King Minos and the Minotaur, which comes from Homer, our ancient Greek poet. Does anybody know the myth of King Minos and the Minotaur? Yeah?
King Minos, he used the god man because he didn't give him his like prime soul. And so the god cursed his wife to have sexual relations with that one.
Mm-hmm.
And then so she gave birth to the Minotaur and he trapped the Minotaur in the labyrinth.
In a labyrinth, right? Which is a maze, a massive maze, right? So he puts a Minotaur in a labyrinth. What did you see that he made it with it, but what is the Minotaur?
It's a
right? And it's a bull's head, I think, right, on a human body, right? But more powerful than huge, right? Exactly, massive. Now, do you remember how the story pans out? What happens after that?
So I think like the problem is that when the thing that she gave birth to that. And then
That couldn't have felt to the horse.
He built a ladder to keep the minotaur in check.
Right.
And then just kept it in there. And is that like a myth that the ladder's moved? So like
I don't know, or is that one of those movies that came out last year? The Maze Runner movies or something. They had who did? The Athenians, right? The people of Athens had to make a sacrifice to the Minotaur, I think every 7 years, and they had to go send, if I remember correctly, 7's enter into it, but they had to send a group of young male virgins and a group of young female virgins. They'd be sucked into the labyrinth, and only the Minotaur knew the secret of the labyrinth, which is basically how it's laid out, right? And they would Athens owed a tribute to King Minos, and that tribute was this semi-annual gift of these virgins that would be fed to the Minotaur, right? So if on a fluke you could somehow get away from the Minotaur, you still couldn't get out because no one knew the secret to the labyrinth, right? So what happens after that? Does anybody remember this part of it? The string, right? Yeah, the Athenians decide, nah, we're not having this, right? And what they do is they send the greatest hero of Athens, his name is Theseus, right? And Theseus goes to the labyrinth to defeat the Minotaur. And the problem that's going to face Theseus is that even if he kills the Minotaur, he's got to get back out of the maze, right? And as Athens' greatest hero, there's probably a good chance he can do it, okay? So he's still got to get back out. And what happens is when he gets there, because he's Athens' greatest hero, King Minos' daughter, Ariadne, falls deeply in love with him right away. And she gives him the string, right? No, it's different than that. This is such a great story. Ariadne gives him the string, so she's fallen deeply in love with Theseus. And we'll come back to why this is that. Why we think this is that, right? She gives him the string and says, here, once you defeat the Minotaur, you can just let the string go behind you, you can follow your way back out, right? Easy peasy. And so he does. He kills the Minotaur, battle, and then pulls the string back out, and he grabs Ariadne, he's on his way out, right? He's going to go back by boat to Athens. And because King Minos is a tyrant, right? He takes his little sister too. Off they go. Right? Saves the thing. Halfway back, he falls in love with the little sister, and he dumps Ariadne on the island. Like, what have you done for me lately, right? Thanks for the string. See ya. And takes off with her sister, right? For the rest. And this is where he has God no, but what happens is the island that he dumps her. This is great. So he throws her overboard. She washes up on the island, right? So he's really just he's done with her. She washes up on the island. It looks like she's nearly dead. And lo and behold, who lives on the island is Dionysus, the god of wine. Greek island with the god of wine forever, right? Yeah, exactly. She could have scored, right? Versus some guy with a sword and a problem with women, So Dionysus resurrects her. This is why the Greeks often look at it as a resurrection, brings back from near death, and she lives happily ever after on an island with Dionysus. It's a great story. The Greeks love good stories, as do I. So why do we think this is that? Right? Why do we think this is that labyrinth, this maze? Right? Oh well. Go to a 10-minute art space. Right? But the bottom line is, if you look at the ground plans here, you can see that the layout of the rooms is really quite confusing. It's a little find your way through, right? The entry is here. Through this way. And this is mostly storerooms over here. And there are a series of royal rooms on either side facing the central courtyard, and these are multi-level as well, connected by 5 staircases. Right? And that odd layout of rooms is what led archaeologists to might be the basis for the myth of the Minotaur, because it's laid in ruins. Furthermore, the word labyrinth, right, which we use as a synonym for cave, is a Greek word. And a labyrinth is a two-headed sword, beheading sword. Right? That's a labyrinth. That's the Greek word for that. And there's one of these carved in one of the rooms. So that leads us to think that that's why labyrinth is named. Over and above that, there are many decorations here that show strange things happening with bones, which we'll talk about tonight, right? That are really kind of fascinating. So there's some interesting rituals with bulls here, as well as the decoration of a labyrinth, that lead, we think, to this idea of the maze-like building where King Minos has lived. Right? Now there's no record of King Minos, right? Because of this palace, we call the civilization on Crete the Minoans, after King Minos, versus the Cycladic civilization on the Cyclades Islands. Right? So it developed from that, but it's slightly different, and it derives its name from them. As we look at Minoan art, and again we'll talk more about the maze, we'll come back to this in a second. But when we look at Minoan art, what we'll see, because they're on an island, is that aquatic motifs dominate. I really love this pot. If I were a pot decorator, I would be happy to have made this one. This wonderful octopus vase, where the round shape of the jar is picked up by the tentacles and the squiggly arms and the eyes of this squid that's decorating. And there's wonderful seaweed-like elements that fill up the spaces between the arms. It really has a great sort of feel for the water, and you can tell that the people who made this on Crete have great experience with aquatic animals, and we see really motifs of the sea dominate the decorations on the island of Crete. If we look at decorations at the Palace at Knossos, the decorations that have survived on some of the roofs, we see also that aquatic motifs dominate here. You can see the same sort of coral elements at the top and the bottom, our happy dolphins, with their very decorative colors on the side, the other fish darting around. There's something about it that's playful. And I think this reflects, on a certain level, the reality of Minoan civilization, not the Greek mythology behind it, right? Not the tyrants that the later Greeks had lived there, but rather these people who are naturally isolated from their enemies and therefore have a much more laid back and sort of frivolous existence in a way. Not frivolous, not the right word, but unthreatened existence. This is another wall decoration from the Palace of Knossos, and you can still see aquatic colors, elements that reflect water and coral and marble in the border decorations in particular. But you'll also notice that there's a ritual with the bull here. And this is certainly part of why we think that this was the basis for that myth of King Minos and the Minotaur. We never see an image of the half-man, half-bull, right? But we do see lots of strange things going on with bulls here. And this is one of them. So what we have, let me see if what's the next one? Good. Before I talk about what's going on in the image, I wanted to talk about what is the image. You'll notice that a lot of it's been restored. The darker bits that cast the shadow are the surviving bits of wall decoration. And the lighter bits between them are what restorers have added to that to let you fill the picture in more fully, right? So this bit here doesn't survive, and they haven't tried to fool you into thinking that it did. It's quite obvious where the old bit ends and the new bit begins. And that's true everywhere we're looking. That's quite highly restored by the conservators. So we don't have every small part of it. You know, something could have happened around the tail back there that we just don't see, right? Because there's a lot of empty space there. Although we do have a bit of the tail, but there's the foot of that in the middle. So, we have three different figures, and they're depicted in different colors. Why do you suppose that is? Why would artists make the figures different colors? Right, two are white and one is red. Did they run out of red paint? Silly. Gender differences, right. We saw with Egyptian art, when we looked at some of the pairs there, one of the waltzes where the woman had darker skin, or lighter skin, and the man had darker skin. And there are a number of different places we can look in early art where skin color is meant to signify gender difference. And men are darker simply, probably because in most societies men are outside more. Right? So what we should look at is that the two light-skinned figures are women. And the man on the back of the bull, the dark-skinned figure is a man. There's a little bit of the anatomy to back this up. You'll notice that the women have a more pronounced chest, right? They don't delineate the breasts, but it is much more expanded in the chest to suggest that they are intended to be gender different as well. Right? So you'll also notice that all of them are dressed basically the same way, which is to say, hardly at all. They're wearing nothing more than bikini bottoms. Even the women are not wearing anything except those armbands from the waist up. Going back to the Cycladic figures, right, as to what's going on there. This raises that question. But what's going on in the picture? What are these three people doing? Fighting the bull of swords. It's almost like a bullfight in a way, only without the swords, you know. They're not killing the bull, but there's some sort of contest with this bull. It almost looks like that, like he's holding up, like, jump through my arms or something like that, like dog training school. Certainly the idea of the guy on the back, right, gives us a sense that something gymnastic is happening here, right? Not in the way you normally ride a bull, facing backwards and on your hands, okay? Furthermore, there's no saddle on the bull, right? So he's leaping off of the back of it. The figure on the left has the bull by the horns. And you'll notice that it's not being gored, the horns are behind it, coming up back here. And the figure over here, what are they doing? It's not a hunt stick, but they have their hands out like that, maybe to catch it. Think of gymnastics as well, pairs gymnastics, or maybe more like circus gymnastics, where somebody catches you and come off the track. Some people think that what they're doing is part of a single ritual, that each of the figures is timeless. A single sort of event where you would let the bull charge at you, grab it by the horns. You know how bulls roar. They go down and then up, right? And you grab the horns, and as they gain the vertebrae, use the bull's own strength to vault yourself onto the back, spring off the back, and then stick your landing. But it's kind of nicer in a way than sticking a sword between the shoulder blades and then, you know, tearing it and cleaning up the ears and, you know, wiping the hair and the body with it. Moving more into the day in this way. But that's what I think is happening here, is that there's a ritual that takes place. And there are numerous pieces of Minoan art that show similar things happening. People flying over the back of the bull. And if you remember the layout of that palace, where this decoration appears, right? There are all these rooms around this central courtyard. This is what we're pretty sure happens in that central courtyard. We're sporting events like this. And it may look crazy, but you know, think about rodeo. Right? Think about a guy who goes down crazy bull for 8 seconds. You know? A bull that has been in the raid, you just want to hold on. Breathe, you know? Let the bull dampen or sport. Well, this is not entirely crazy by comparison. So you have to go. Are you done? You don't want to talk now? Involuntary muscle action.
No, I remember. The pool,
Yeah.
he is like really small. Like,
I don't know what you're saying. Why? I'm not quite sure what to answer that. I'm not quite sure what you why is the bull? Well, certainly I think part of it is that it's dominating the composition. The other part is I think it wants to show that this is a bull that's flying through the air, and one way to do that is put any animal to stretch out like that as it flies through the air. I'm not quite sure what you want me to go into animal husbandry and think about like that they raise really elongated bulls for size of that.
I just want to know why the painter,
Shows you. Well, I guess the answer to that, because painters didn't write about why they did that. So the way I might answer that is to put you on the spot a little bit and say, what kind of impact does it have being that big and long? Exactly, and I think that our answer lies in our own reaction to it, our own response to it. We can usually find a sort of common sense answer there. That it's longer like that because A is more powerful than the people, and that's the case very clearly. And B, I think works better with the composition.
yeah. Aside from like you said, it's possibly like a time lapse or like time and everything. Is it possible this is like a ritual to like prove like manliness, like your manhood? Like if you're only a man, like if you what?
I wonder because part of me thinks that okay. I mean, I grew up in a different era, but there was this movie called Man Called Horse with Richard Harrison in the early 70s. And he was a white man that joined, he was a settler, and he ended up being adopted by the Indian tribe. He had to go through these rituals. Yeah, they ran rings through his skin and hung him up. And he had to like endure that, and that proved he was a man. Right? I wonder if there's this idea that there's some sort of coming of age ritual or induction ritual that might be part of it. And that's a really good question. I don't have an answer to it. I do know that it's important to them. It could just be sport as well. Yeah. And I don't know enough about rodeo culture. I'm from Oregon, and I've been to my fair share of rodeos, but I don't know enough about rodeo culture. I've never been on the other side of the fence, to know whether or not that's also part of it. But one of the things that we see, I think, when we think about things like rodeo, is that it's putting a gymnastic and ritual spin on things you need to do anyway. That the hunt is something about mastering the animal. And that many times these sports that come up with us and animals are sports that are actually putting a sort of a ritual spin on that. Yeah? So the bullfight puts a ritual spin on that. Rodeo, where you've got to ride your thing around a barrel. Well, you have to do that outside, but you have to cut around a tree sometimes. So let's make a contest out of it, right? And I think there's something there for that. Furthermore, I mean, if we think about where we are in the Mediterranean here, this entire region, bullfights aren't just in Spain. But Spain's not that far away anyway. And are we looking at the roots of that here? In Greece, actually, I got a great thing I can so that whole that idea, right? So I'm going to also get some good details here too. And there you can see the horns of the bull going behind this figure. They grab it and flip their way across the back of the bull. There he is. The hair length is obviously not a determinant of gender here because his hair is, if anything, longer than theirs is. And it looks as if his hands are wailed down on the sides of it rather than doing a handspring off the back. I can go back. It does, doesn't it? I don't know if that, is that just the, that would be just like, how you got that little thing, that little muscle inside of here, right? Where your tear duct is, there's that little, I don't know if that's just a stylized version of that. I wouldn't be crying, I'd be like, yeah. Because it's not a blood sport. And, the bull gets out of here, I think. The bull gets out of here, it's not going to get skewered and, driven mad with the little pins that they stick in it and make them that much more angry. So there's our leaping figure off the back, and there's our landing figure over here. You can see now that she doesn't have anything in her hands, and it's been back in the plaster. But it's almost as if she's, ta-da! I've made it all the way through. And I brought in a couple of other elements here where we can see, here's a signet ring, right? It's a ring with a stamp on the end of it, where we can see different figures jumping over the back of the bull as well. This one's really terrific because look at the guy that's in front of the bull. His hands are still on the horns, and he's coming up over feet-wise. He gets something going to do a pirouette in the air before he lands on the back of the bull and then leaps off again. These are our backup evidence for what was happening in the bull leaping fresco, right? And what we think is that this took place in the main courtyard, which is labeled number 4 here in the center, because all of the palace rooms on the sides have great, huge floor-to-ceiling windows that look out onto the courtyard. So the courtyard seems to have been some sort of display space. Now this is quite similar to what we saw when we looked at Assyrian palaces as well. That there were these lion hunts that probably took place at Nimrud and Nineveh that are reflected in some of the relief sculptures that we saw there. So this idea of using the palace itself as a place for staging ritual hunts is something that really crosses many different cultures. There's a view of the courtyard as well, and you can see the different rooms that look out onto it. Really a quite wide expanse where you can get this really great view of our acrobatic performers. And like I said before, people are still doing this, right? They've actually revived the bull leaping kind of hunt. Not hunt, but a bullfight, right? The bull leaping type in Greece. And look at that. It's like, okay, not for everybody, but people are still in fact doing it. Yeah, and in France there's this kind in Provence they have a bullfight where also the bull has ribbons that you try to take off and get away, right? Rather than killing it. They also do the Spanish killing kind. But they also do these other ones where it chases you around, the job is just to get back out of the way, right? And some of them where they have ribbons tied all over its mane, and you just try to, whoever gets the most ribbons is going to win this whole contest, right? And I thought that's what I'll give you a second. I thought that was what I was going to see when I went to a bullfight in Arles with Karen, my wife. And we were going like, oh, great, because we know that the Arles bullfights don't kill them. They did. And it's just like, it's kind of so sad. And the guy the last bullfight was a young up-and-coming. By the way, this makes a great Adidas hat, wouldn't it? I wonder what kind of Adidas you have to wear. They're a full leaping Adidas. But anyway, the last bullfight of the night was the kid who was just learning. He didn't do it well. The bull guy, but not quickly. And it was really horrific. Yeah. Yeah. And in fact, yeah. When this was first excavated, I don't know the guy's name now. I've lost it. Evans. Sir Arthur Evans was the one who excavated it. And he called the women in the bull leaping fresco, he said they're like rodeo clowns. Because he suggested that what they were doing was distracting the bull so the guys could go out and do their thing. And we're not 100% sure it's the case because some of them seem to show that they're grabbing the horns and participating as well, right? But his idea was that they were doing the exact same thing that rodeo clowns did, right? That was his assumption. Very quickly, we have other bull things from Knossos, the palace at Knossos, and all of them suggest to us this real focus on the bull. So here's something from the Walters Art Museum, a seal that you would press into clay to make an impression of the bull. And here's another seal carved agate. Can you read this? There's two reclining bulls here. So here's the head and the snout. There's the eye. There's the snout. There's the jaw. The horn. And then the dead leg. Right? In this direction. And then there's another one that appears to have back to us here, laying next to us. So there's, everywhere we look in Minoan artifacts, we find these references to bulls, and this only adds to the idea that this must have been the basis of what Homer was using as his, his inspiration for the myth of the Minotaur. And that horn mouth thing to show you, this is one of the gates here. That's right, it's kind of a blurry picture. But as we work our way up to the courtyard, there's that pair of disembodied horns stylized. That you can see as well, that again adds to the idea that this was really important. Right? This wasn't just a side thing, this ritual decoration, but in fact it was part of their identity. It was, even though they're mostly aquatic. Let's take our break. At 5:05, let's come back about quarter after. That'll give us enough time to sort of chill out here and maybe get some fresh air. This room is really stuck. Are you cold? Oh my God, I need to sit over there. Can we trade places? Come over here. It's like stuffier than all the get out over here. I saw that. You think I can't see?
It's really cold. I know.
It's recording. Okay, we're going to wrap up talking about this art and move into ancient Greece very soon. So we're looking at Minoan art here, works that came from the palace at Knossos. What do I want to say here? Here we are, right here. This was in your textbook that shows a very similar, not exactly the same, costume to our two rodeo cowboys in the bull leaping fresco, which is to say, Janet Jackson wardrobe malfunction thing here. And as you can see, we often think of her as being a goddess figure or maybe a priestess figure. This was found also at the Palace of Knossos in a space that was used as a religious sanctuary. And she has that bare-breasted costume that's worn by our bull leapers. So that makes me wonder whether or not our bull leaping figures are priestesses at a ritual or goddesses who are watching this take place. Maybe there's something else to think about with them, that they're not really there in the first place, but that they are heaven, taking part in this ritual, that they're embodiments of something bigger. And that's, in fact, something we'll see quite a bit in Greek art when we finally get to it, is this idea that there are muses that attend the different events that show this melding of heaven and earth. And since they have a costume similar to our four-horned goddess costume here, is it possible that they are representatives of the earthly realm being melded with the heavens? And that's distinctly possible. She has snakes, obviously, in her hands, cat in the hat, if you will, as well. And she has, in addition to that costume, she has those odd, in fact, her nipples look like eyes, don't they? It's like, she's staring at you in a couple of different ways. And those beady staring eyes are really creepy. With that cat who's poised up there looking at you. All of these, I think, are intended to associate her directly with nature. You'll notice that the decoration on the costume of her arms also makes it look like there are snakes wrapped around her arms, too. Right? All of this is, she's like the power of nature itself staring out at you. And we know that cats were important to them, and the snakes maybe is the wrong word. It might also be eels is a possibility as well, since this is an aquatic culture, since they're on an island in the Mediterranean. But we do know that there were numerous other illustrations of felines in many of their rooms. And so we think that, in fact, that she's probably a priestess or a goddess. We have one of these figures up at the Walters Art Museum made out of gold and alabaster. This is pretty bad shape, right? The arms are broken off, but it's basically the same kind of figure. You can see the alabaster bits have worn, but the other nice thing is that she's clad in gold, which adds to this. There are snakes on her hat at the top. They got a detail of that to show you. And on her dress down below, this one's in a little bit better focus, but you can see those two snakes that now work their way up here, and then the heads come down to here and here, right? Again, it's the connection between snakes and these holy figures. What's up next? Up on her hat as well, and I know that's a bit blurry, but you can still see more of these snake forms everywhere. And yeah, it looks even creepier because she's sort of zombie-like. She's sort of, decayed a bit. But that's just simply from the alabaster having worn away. Right? So these were fairly plentiful coming out of Minoan civilization. Not on display, the Walters also has a stone version of one of these as well. So these are fairly common in Minoan culture, where again we see snakes everywhere. In this particular case, on her crown, you can see two snakes coming together and biting each other directly above her nose at the top of this. Again, we talked about the fact that many of these earliest civilizations on the islands off of the mainland of Greece formed the basis for Greek mythology. And this idea of a staring woman arresting you with her gaze and associated with snakes. Medusa, exactly. You know about Medusa and the Gorgons? There were three sisters who had snakes for hair and whose very look, very gaze, would turn, and if you met eyes with them, they would turn you to stone. Right? They would turn you immediately into stone. And the way that they were defeated by Perseus was he polished his shield at that, right? Over his shoulder. So this is definitely, I have this picture here to show you. This is in one of the museums we're going to go to, the 17th century sculpture by Bernini of Medusa with the snakes in her hair, right? Yeah. Okay.
Why is Medusa on so many like old Greek
things?
not things, but like graves and like tombs?
Yeah.
Is she like protecting from innocent, or is she like just want her things to?
I'll answer your question and I'll figure out what's making Genesis.
Yeah, I looked up at her and I noticed she wasn't looking at the board. She was looking like this and like this direction. And then I remember that thanks for that, but she's not looking at it.
Right, okay. You're lucky I didn't bring the other one with me. This painting I had where his head's been cut off in pieces like.
Oh my god, no.
It's still running.
Look at it.
Okay. Well, the question is, why does Medusa appear on so many graves, tombs, temples? Part of the idea of Medusa turning something into stone is that you could use that to your benefit if you could figure it out, right? And so they become, there's a $10 word for this, is an apotropaic device, a device that wards off evil, even though it is intrinsically evil itself. But there is, in fact, I can't remember if I have it in my slides or not, it's in your textbook, there's an early temple, or a cave Greek temple, where we see Medusa at the top of the pediment right over the entryway. And the idea is that this horrifying thing is supposed to keep away the people you don't want there.
Okay, is it like the evil eye?
Very much like the evil eye, exactly like the evil eye. And in this case, of course, that first one, she had evil eyes on her breast as well, right? So I will, here, save you from that. No more snakes. I don't like snakes either, but they don't bother looking at them in art because it's hard. Go look up Rubens' picture of the head of Medusa, and then her claws crawling out of her ears. But I normally keep the stuff I show that one but I'm showing you this one because I'm going to Rome, and you'll see it there. I'll warn you. Okay. Okay. Now, at its height, right? We were talking about the fact that the people, the way that migration worked, right, from Anatolia to the Cyclades, from the Cyclades back to Crete. Right? At the height of its civilization during this last period, 1700 to 1400, the people of Crete began to recolonize the Cyclades Islands. Okay, they come to move back. So we find the Minoan culture spreading in this last 300 years of it. And on the island of Thera, we have this Minoan palace. And I'm only bringing it in first to show you what we've been talking about with Minoan art, this fascination with the aquatic motifs, that idea of the holy sort of isolated. But with Minoan art in general, because of seafaring, because the life of their livelihood comes from the sea, we have an overabundance of these aquatic motifs, but also this sort of playful approach to nature, despite that. It is very much like Dr. Seuss, isn't it? Because it's also almost like it's underwater, like an aquarium, things you put there at the bottom, even though it's not, right? But it has that sense of being a coral, growing up. And yeah, it's rather fun in its way, right? And again, this is, I think, because the sea gave them a natural protection from enemies that might show up at any particular point. The main reason to bring this in is if you look at the island of Thera, which today is called Santorini, on our map, I've highlighted it there. You'll notice it looks like kind of like an ear, right? It's like a C shape with the thing in the middle. And look at this. That's what it looks like. This is from Google, right? But that's the island of Thera. That's where this palace was found. And can you tell what that island used to be? Can you tell what happened here? It's exploded, yeah. It's an old volcano that erupted. You can even see the top of the volcano in the middle where the water gets shallow, right? So originally that was just one island, not two. And the bit in the middle exploded out. We think this is what destroyed the civilization. Because if you think about what that would have done, an island like that erupting, right? Think of what did the 7-point earthquake do to Japan? Or to Malaysia a few years back, right? Those were walls of water that were, 10 feet maybe, 15 or something, and destroyed everything, Imagine what would have happened with that. What it would have done to the island of Crete, to the other Cycladic islands, right? We think this is exactly why these islands, all these cultures, the Minoans and the Cycladic, basically disappeared around the year 1300, was because of the eruption of Thera. Right? The other thing that's happening about Thera is the idea of a culture on an island that ends up under the ocean is also the source, we think, of another Greek myth, of Atlantis, the city under the sea. Right? So, again, so much of what forms the building blocks of Greek mythology can all be found in the remains, the archaeological of these different regions. Now, the Minoans also spread to the mainland, and some of this was destroyed with that massive eruption as well, but because it's the mainland and parts of these are in the mountains, some of them survived past that, right? Because they were high enough up. They were outside of the tsunami zone, right? Just as they spread to Thera, the people from Crete, they also spread to the Peloponnesus, which is that, Greece is almost dense and it's connected by a very thin bit of land here, to this, which looks like an island, but isn't connected, the Peloponnesus, right? There was a number of cities that were established there originally by the Minoans, but we now call them after the largest city there, we call them Mycenaean, after the city of Mycenae. But all the little red dots there are places where there were, in fact, settlements, early settlements on mainland Greece from the spreading from Knossos northward, right? So the Mycenaeans are our third great early civilization from around this same time. And as you can see, a lot of Minoan overlap. We have this vase on the right with a petal or octopus on it, right? Not as beautiful as the one that was in the textbook, but not a bad example, nothing to sneeze at either. Right? But the same interest in aquatic, oceanic motifs on these works of art. Up in the Walters Art Museum, we have something quite similar. Cuttlefish is part of the octopus family. I didn't know that when I ordered one in Venice one time, and it sat there squiggling and staring at me from the plate. It wasn't alive anymore, but it was pretty. I thought cuttlefish. Oh, it's a fish. Right? I didn't know. Oh, it's a bay octopus. I didn't want to look stupid, and instead I looked stupid just sitting there staring at it, and it was staring back at me. This is a funny story. This is why we're so far behind. You guys ask me these questions, I have to tell you. I wouldn't do this in a normal class, but since we're going to go all room together, you should hear these stories anyway. So my wife and I would go into Venice, right? It was Christmas time. It was right after 9/11, so it was cheap as chips. We got a round-trip airfare from Portland to Milan for like $320. Yeah, from Portland to Milan, round trip. It was December of 2001. So it was just after 9/11, right? We spent 3 weeks there for no money at all, and traveled. Anyway, we go to Venice. We had just had the best meal of our lives at this little Italian fishing village called Noli, which is near San Remo, kind of up in, Italy comes down like this road down here. It's up in the hook there before you get to France, right? Little town, and I looked it up in my touring club Italiano guide, and he said, unspoiled fishing village. Yeah, it's just got we were looking for, and found this cheap hotel that was an old 14th century villa that had been converted. It was terrific, and the wind was blowing just right, so it was like 65 degrees on a Christmas. And we had this wonderful dinner. We sat by the lagoon, and the water was rushing in, and here the rocks. It was just, it was terrific, After, next morning we go out, we watch the put out their boats to go fishing, and they got the radios hung up, and it's singing, it was better. And the food was like, the only people in the restaurant, he just pulled out the stops. The guy did, and it was cheap as chips. And one of the things that they had was this octopus dish. And I sort of liked octopus, all right, whether or not. But they sliced the octopus thin, and wasting your time. And they sliced it with Parmesan cheese, and they covered it all with lemon and olive oil, and you couldn't tell which you got, whether it was Parmesan or octopus until you ate it. And it was fresh, right? It was so good. So we get to Venice, and you see this thing cuttlefish. It must be what that thing was. Maybe this is a version of that. And it comes out and it's just disgusting. Squiggly and covered in this oil. And I didn't eat anything but meat for the next 3 or 4 days because I couldn't. The idea that eat fish at that point. And then this couple sat down next to us. We sort of thought we can't just sit in the couch. So we went at the tentacles and had a little bit and didn't like it. And this couple sat down next to us and they went through it like it was the last thing on earth. Right? Had it all. They were just like, you were having trouble looking at the snake. You were like, and there's tentacles flying in the air. Okay, so this is, I'm done telling the story. Where am I on my notes? Okay, so we bring all these Cretan things, these Minoan issues that seem to have come up to the Greek mainland, right, to the Peloponnesus, to what we now call Mycenaean culture, because it eventually branches away, right? It becomes independent from the Minoans, even though that's why they formed, right? And here's the city of Mycenae. This is the wall in. The big difference between the Mycenaeans and the Minoans, even though there's a lot of overlap in their artistic production, is that the Mycenaeans, being on the mainland of Greece, have every reason to be worried about the neighbors. And their cities are fortified in a way that we never saw with the Mycenaeans. The Mycenaeans were open because the ocean was their protection. But here, we're on land that stretches all the way to the mainland of Europe, and there's no reason that they should assume that they cannot trust, or there's no reason they assume that they can trust their neighbors. And so, here's the city-state of Mycenae. If you want to get there, you have to come to the top of the mountain. This is how they survived that earthquake/tidal wave. The only way to get up there is this winding path. And here was off our picture. In fact, this way. And then as you come to the gateway, it narrows in. As you're still rising up the hill, right? It narrows in, and then there's a massive gateway where if you're trying to protect the city, it's very easy because you put all your archers and people with rocks and stuff up here. And as the army crowds into this narrow gateway, it goes away in the city, right? Keep the crap out of it. Kill them. And so it becomes very defensible. And furthermore, within the city itself, the fortified city itself, all of Philippines live in here, right? The palace, these live down here, and the palace where the king lives is on the highest crest of the hill. So he can still go high and still and get away in the case that the walls were built. And it was separately fortified as well, right? So the Mycenaeans have fortifications in a way that we never saw in the Minoan work, even though that's the roots of their civilization. Now, there's a 10-minute art fix on the Lion Gate at Mycenae as well, and discusses a bit more thoroughly this particular fortified city-state. I just want to reiterate that, again, this is the roots of Greek mythology. The Mycenaean region is where Homer set the Iliad. It's the king of Mycenae who wages the war against Troy, right? So, but that's all much later. That's around the 8th century BC versus the 14th, 13th century BC. So it's, again, looking back through 600 years of the last time to the ruins of the past. Because this was in ruin as well. Not from the natural disaster, but probably from being attacked. Probably from being beset from the people of the north. Right. Now, one last thing about the Mycenaeans before we actually look at Greek culture is the way they would bury their kings was very similar to what we... Why is that? Homer's Iliad, not okay. The way they would bury their kings was similar to what we've seen in some other cultures. What they did was they buried their kings under man-made hills that were outside the city gates and meant to be hidden from view. Right? You would just see this sort of mound of earth. But underneath the mound of earth was a massive chamber in which the king would be buried. Right? And that's what we see here. So we nicknamed it the treasury of Atreus, one of the more famous kings of Mycenae, and the treasury because they did what the Egyptians did, which is to bury their rulers with copious amounts of gold. In fact, Homer says that the Mycenaeans were rich with gold. And so they buried like the Egyptians did. And if we think about Egypt, by the year 1300, Egyptians had been burying their kings inside either pyramids or in the sides of cliffs for a very good long time. Right? And they seem to have adopted the practice here in Mycenae, in the early Mycenaean culture. Right? And as you can see, when we work our way through, we're now looking out through that door. The doorway itself is quite thick. Can you see that in the slide on the right? It's pretty hard to get to this one that shows this really light. But as we walk through, the door is incredibly thick. Right? A good, I think, 10 or 13 feet across that stretch. Right? So when you come in here, I think I do have a slide actually somewhere. Somebody standing in here. But you're about like that tall. Or so. So imagine 3 quarters of the stone, more or less, right? About your height, maybe 4. And it is the largest interior space anywhere for the next 1,000 years. Nobody built a single interior space in city. And as you look at it, it's a feat of engineering in that the way that it tapers up, like foam like this, right? That's like a beehive. They often call these beehives. Right? What that means is because it's gently tapered, increasingly toward the top, that means that every single stone has to be individually carved. Because you couldn't take a stone from one course and move it down because the arch would be wrong. There is different bezels the closer you get to the top. And they're also at a different radius this way. Right? So you couldn't take that stone and simply put it here. Everyone has to be dressed and designed exactly for the spot. Over the top of the door, there's a single lintel, massive lintel, that's so heavy that they left an arch over the top of it so that none of the weight would break it. All of it would come out this way. And that's a structural engineering element they probably are in the Egyptians. inside the pyramid, over the tomb where the king will be placed inside the middle of the pyramid, there are relieving arches that allow them to stay above the roof, so that the weight of the roof is directed up and around rather than directly on so one cave in. Now this room that we're looking at inside is only the room where the rituals took place. It's like a temple, if you will, a burial temple, because as you came through this monumental gateway and into that interior is not where they actually put the body. That was just this room for the ritual. And here's a view of it. So we've come into this area here, and the actual burial chamber was hidden up the side, plugged up. So I think for tomb raiders, if you were to find your way into this, you might think, oh, it's empty, but in fact, this was the actual burial chamber off the side of it. And it's not from this particular burial, but we do have one of these where we see this funerary burial map that originally wrapped around the side of the face of the king as he was buried. So even though it's flattened out like a hubcap here, right, you have to imagine that the sides of it would actually wrap around the ears of the king, and down below on the chin would actually wrap around underneath the neck. But it's in hammered gold. And again, this idea of burying your kings with this sort of luxury, with a gold face mask, is something that, again, they probably borrowed from the Egyptians, right? And we can't stress enough, the degree to which these different cultures are interconnected insofar as their artistic practices, of taking ideas and reworking them amongst these different cultures. One other side note, just because it was interesting, last fall when I was teaching this, and I got to cut, that week in the newspaper, the beard fell off in the Egyptian Museum. When they had dug up King Tut's tomb in 1923, the beard was found over here because normally it was attached with a dowel. So that on the bottom of the gold chin, there's a little place that a stick would go in, right? It would stick out, and then there's a hole on the end of the beard that would, stick up on that, and that would hold it in place, right? All well and good in 1323 BC, but in 1923 AD, the stick had shrunk and changed, and the beard had fallen off, so they stuck it back on again, right? Well, the glue they had used had sort of seen its course by 2015, and had fallen off. And apparently, they just grabbed it, and they immediately, they didn't want anybody to notice, and stuck it back on again really quickly. And they did a really crappy job of assembling to the side, and they had this huge hoopla until they figured out that everybody thought, oh my God, they broke it, But they didn't break it, it was broken to begin with, and they were trying to get it on there quickly. But now they've got it back, and it's where it belongs. So, yeah, it's pretty cool. I love these things when they come up in the news. Okay, and also here's our just to keep in mind that Mycenaean Crete, Egypt, it's not far away in the grand scheme of things, right? Especially for people that are skilled at seafaring. And then if you look at where our Sumerians were over on the right, you can see that all of this is really not all that distant in the grand scheme of things, right? And that brings us finally, I think, to major, Greece as we know it, right? So we were looking at these early civilizations on the Greek mainland and on the island of Knossos. There was a period of what we call a dark ages that followed on the fall of these two great civilizations, lasting from around 1200 BC to around 800 BC. By dark ages, I mean dark for us. Usually when we talk about dark ages, it's not like the civilization sucked, right, or was bad, but that we just don't know anything about it. We're in the dark. And there was this period of Greek history where we don't quite know what was going on much between around 1200 BC and around 800 BC. And we started seeing things kick off again in the 8th century, the 700s, is where we start to have some really strong record of artifacts that we can look at to try to put back together what culture was all about. And what's interesting is as we look at some of these very early works, there's an 8th century BC work down in Richmond, right, the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. this amphora that describes the shape of pot that we're looking at. An amphora is a wide-bellied pot with a thin neck and two handles. I'm not going to test you of pot types, but you'll see a lot of pot names come up because that's how they're often referred to. Okay? Don't worry, you won't be tested on it. But you'll notice as we look at this amphora in particular that some of these very, very early works from now, if you will, high Greek culture, right? We're getting there. They have something very similar in the way of the figural style. If you look at the figures in the Volgate fresco, you'll notice that all three of them have sort of triangular bodies, pinned waists, and heavy hips and thighs. Tiny, tiny little feet, dainty little feet, and dainty little hands. If you look at this pot from 700 plus years later, you'll notice that even though the figures are in silhouette, that basic body type returns. So our earliest stuff seems to harken back to the traditions that had been established by the Minoans and the Mycenaeans and are reasserted here. Now, can you tell what's illustrated here in this central band of decorations? What's going on there? Some sort of parade. Why do we say parade?
Well, like, since they're all lined up, not like they're, well, not like kids or anything, but like,
No community balloons.
yeah, there's like, but like, they're in formation, and they're nodding, I guess, towards something. It could be like a skull or like
They're moving in one direction, right? They're all moving in one direction. Okay. And so it's a parade of sorts. Who is taking part in this parade? Who are these figures? I mean, you haven't really gotten into the specifics of what we're looking at there. Yeah.
people riding the carriages, but
People riding carriages with really big schnozzes. Yeah. The men that are holding, the people that are holding the horses, it's hard to say men or women. But you'll notice that they're very simplified reins, right? They go direct, almost perfectly horizontal to the nose of the horse. But they're people in chariots, right? So each we have a row of 1, 2, 3 at least that we can see on this side. People in chariots moving forward. Probably, yes. Right? Again, very stylized, right? Very abstracted horses. Like, I mean, if you think about what we saw with early Cycladic art and how the human figure was turned into sort of a real simplified geometry, we have horses that are there, and yes, it's awkward, right? The bottom part of the horse almost looks like a human, doesn't it? Here. Like a human here, right? And then they get very thin and doing, why did they make the bottom like that? Again, I think they're trying to stylize it for decoration in this particular case. And then there's very long neck here, and I think if they bust enough here, that you can tell what kind of animal it is. And it's pretty, and in addition to that, the back of the chair. Right? Our figures are seen apparently in profile with that strange nose that's on them. The heads that appear on these early plots are often really keen as are the bodies themselves. But I was really fascinated by the fact that this, after the intervening 600 years or so, we seem to return to some body types that had been established by earlier works of art. In many ways, looking back to those for their initial inspiration. Now, this kind of procession hope that you were talking about, where else have we seen a procession that's similar to this? Oh yeah, but he wasn't in a chariot though, was he? He was on foot, right?
yeah, but he was like all the way in the back, and they were in profile.
Right, and moving in one direction, right?
Yeah, and there's actually one that was like that.
There was also one where we actually saw the chariot. Right, the standard of war, exactly. We saw that as well. And there, in that case, right, and the farmer, the processions were about military victory, right? So the question is for us here, is this one about military victory as well? Is that what the procession with horses is? And I don't have a good answer for that with this particular plot, but my guess is yes, right? So there we see it again from the side here, two different views. And up around the neck at the top, we can see more animals walking. And you'll notice that everywhere we look, where there are figures, and even where there aren't figures, the artist, our top painter, has filled up almost every possible space with some sort of design. So with the chariots down below, there are those sort of jittery zigzag patterns beneath the chest of the horses and the space behind the horses. In all of the bands around it, we see all of these meander patterns where everything is filled with something. Right? There's almost a fear of leaving any space open as you look. And if we look at the top of the neck, just below the neck here, we see other animals. Do you think those are horses again? Looks like deer almost. But then there's that jaw, right? That's spicy. But notice that they're walking with their heads down? Could be well, hard to say, isn't it? But I wonder if you look at look at the forms that fill the spaces underneath the horses. Notice how much more design has been put into those trapezoids, right? That have been put into the other stuff that we're seeing. It's almost as if they're meant to be something rather than just a filler space. And I think what they are shields, military shields. And we'll see them of various designs here. And what I think is going on with this, and we'll see other plots that sort of give us more information on this. What's going on with this is that this is a funerary procession you were going to say that, for a fallen military leader. And on a certain level, these animals at the top, wherever they may be, are put in a position of mourning in a way, walking with their heads down. Right? Now these very early pots, and we'll see 2 or 3 of these, because there's one at the Walters, there's one in, we'll see about 4 or 5 in Rome as well. And there's a nice one in your textbook too. But we refer to these very earliest pots from the 8th century as being geometric style pots. And the reason is that so much of the decoration is based on geometry. Whether it's the fill-in bits that we're seeing, the zigzag pattern, or the meander pattern, or whether it's the way they treat the animals, so abstracting them that they're hard to read, based on geometric principles, triangles, and rectangles, instead of something more realistic, something more naturalistic. So these very early pots are often referred to as geometric pots. And like I said, there's quite a few examples of these. This one is in Rome. As you can see, the basic layout is very similar. It's another amphora. That's not an amphora. Why do they call it that? The label did, because amphoras have the arms out to the sides, and this one has them on like this. Anyway, I think a crater is wide mouth. I think. Right? Yeah, an open mouth rather than neck sitting at the neck. I think it would be a great thing. We have a pottery studio to go and make one of these. Wouldn't that be fun?
No.
You can go to help us. But you look down below, right, on this one, that we have that same basic theme that we saw before. In this case, it's a team of horses drawing a man in turn. Yes, it's been damaged, right? But figures walking in a procession. And then you'll notice that up above on the neck, instead of having animals, we have what appear to be women also walking, hands joined in a procession. All of these things suggest funerary processions, and if we look at enough of these pots, what we'll find is, in fact, that there are some that suggest that they're all meant to be that way, meant to be seen that way, right? This one from the textbook, right? The famous, now there's your crater, right? The Dipolon crater, which has the handles on the sides like this one, with a wider mouth, has the same sort of meander pattern at the top, all the geometry everywhere. This is one of the most famous examples. It's named after, and this gives us some idea about how these were used. Dipolon is the name of a cemetery in Athens. This was found in the cemetery. And the way these pots were originally used, these 8th century pots, they were used as grave markers in advance of a gravestone, right? And many of them have holes drilled in the bottom of the belly of the pot, which make us think that what they did was they would pour some sort of fluid into it and have it seep in into the ground as part of a ritual for the afterlife, right? And here we can see quite clearly that it's meant to be a military procession down below, and in fact a burial ritual at the top. We'll see details of those coming up, right? So here's our military procession, and again, the same sort of bodies that we've seen before. Huge hips, tiny feet, little bitty arms and legs, triangular upper body, straight heads, some of them in three-quarter view, but if you look to the right, you'll see these weird beak-like things with a single eyeball in the middle of them. And then the bodies of those other ones are just utterly strange. They're probably meant to be shields. And we'll see other examples of Greek shields that look like that, but it makes them look almost like an apple that's been eaten down to the core, you know. But they're all moving in procession. You'll notice the background is filled everywhere with these design details, filling up every possible empty space. Right? But some of them are armed, some of them have arrows, some of them have spears, and that adds to this idea that these are all military processions, fallen military leaders. And in this particular case, we have at the top the actual burial ritual, where the figure who has died has been laid on that altar, surrounded by his family who are grieving. Look at the person, I know there's a crack there, but just standing off his head here, right? This figure there, right? Got one hand on her hair, and the other hand's up in the air, and they geometricize it so everything goes at 90-degree angles, right? Your arms don't work that way. But definitely mourning. And down below we have ducks and animals on their knees, mourning or perhaps sacrifice, children at his feet, another woman sitting down by a big woman, sitting at his feet with another child in her lap, and all these figures on the sides with their arms like this as a symbol of probably, I can't do it anymore, right? Pulling out their hair. I guess I've done it too much, right? But anyway, as their hands on their heads is a sign of mourning. So we have the burial ritual on this pot that was intended for to be used to mark a grave. Now, this is up in New York at the Metropolitan Museum, and I thought I should just show you this because it always blows people away to see how big that sucker is. It's a good 4 feet tall, right? So when we think about these things being used as grave markers, it's not like somebody just putting a little pot down there, right? Most of them are pretty substantial, anywhere between 2 and 5 feet tall, right?
The part of which he like runs into the store, is like full of pottery and things like that. You know, just really small store, something he wanted to remind me of that.
I'm always fascinated about art. Yeah, I'm always fascinated when art shows up in movies because I'm always curious if they get it right. I'm a rotten critic of it, so I look at it like, that can't be. No, they wouldn't have those kinds of pots then, you know. So I ruined it, you know, for everybody, not just myself. Another of these in the Walters as well, just to belabor the point a bit, where we see just how common these sorts of themes are. So in this amphora, we have the same scene at the top that we had in the Dimpelon crater, where figures laid on the funerary altar and mourning figures beneath it and on the sides of it with children included as well. And then again down below, we have more of the same things we've seen again with chariot figures and multiple horses, 3 in the team, figures with shields and lances, and then mourning animals down below, right? All the things we've seen. So they're fairly repetitious in the way that they depict these forms, right? And some details here. There's the section down below. The painting on this is in, it's not cake. The red that you're seeing is the color of the earthenware, the pot itself. And these are thrown pots, right? They're not, there's two ways to make a pot. One, you can just build it by hand. The other way is to turn it on a wheel, which is called thrown pottery. These are thrown pots, right? And the way that you usually color a pot after it's been fired is, modern day we have glazing, right? The thing that keeps it separate, right? So the Vespa cup, smooth on the inside. So there's glaze, but what you've done is you put a sand-based thing that you bake hot enough that it turns to glass, right? They didn't have kilns that were that hot. It would freeze freaking hot to make glass. And what they did was they just mixed certain irons into thinned out clay that they would paint it with. And when it baked, the iron turned black, right? So it's just basically clay on clay is the way they did it. And then later we'll see they'll actually be able to polish that to make it look as if it's glazed. In fact, it's just slip, potter's slip, right? Coming up next, there's our funerary scene at the top as well. So again, we've seen numerous examples. Yeah, she's got her hands on the head and one down below on her knees. And again, there's children involved too. Isn't that a child near the feet of this figure, standing sort of on the side of that leg of the altar? You can see it. I don't know what came up there. Here we go. Vases from the next century, to move into the 7th century, the 600s, were not used as grave markers and tend to focus more on animal decorations. Although some of the animals, like the deer we see down below, who said deer before? That was you, right? You'll notice that they seem to be grazing at this point, not necessarily in any kind, on the right, and not necessarily in any sort of mournful state. But again, working in procession around the outside of the pot, and included amongst these realistic animals are some fantastic ones as well, such as that griffin that you see in the one from Rome on the left. And oinoko is a wine vessel, right, used for decanting wine. And they usually mix their wine with water so as not to get too trashed too quickly, right? And so this is what these are for, decanting wine. And that's what that word means, is a wine decanter. Yeah, Hope.
I was just going to ask if they have liquids in these.
So now you know. Now you know. Wine. Right? And again, not storage so much as service, right? But you'll notice that some elements continue from those very earliest pots. We still have those geometric patterns in certain areas, and we still have that sense of procession and repetition that we saw before. But one of the things that people point to with these ones from the 7th century is the increasing influence of art from Mesopotamia. The animal influenced art that we saw, those really strong bulls and whatnot. If you look at the bull that's striding forward in the one from Richmond on the right, from the VMFA, even though it has that amoeba for a body, you'll notice if you look at the head of it, that there's something about it that's quite similar on the right to things that we see from Mesopotamia. And this griffin in the Rome pot on the left looks very much like those Lamassu figures that were standing guard at the gates of Assyrian temples, which is not that far off the time of this one as well. They're roughly around the same time. Right? So stronger influence from Mesopotamia in this particular period. We also begin to see human figures in the 7th century, and they too seem to show very strongly the influence of Mesopotamian art coming into Greece. So here, the staring figure with one hand, and again, here, also Egyptian, isn't it? One hand's bald, the other hand is out flat, although with the palm up. But those pharaoh statues that we saw had something very similar, didn't they, with one palm down. But in this case, the staring figures with tiny little lips, and those great huge eyes and that wavy hair, they should look really familiar, you know? That they're having some contact with Mesopotamia and picking up some influences from the very earliest of these Sumerian figures. You can see that the lips and the eyes and the face are really quite similar in the pair of these. So 7th century, right, as we move past that early geometric period, we start to see the Aegean period, Mesopotamia, in the 7th century, we start to see the influence that began with Mycenaean and Minoan, right? The art of the early Greek islands. We start to see that be melded with things they're picking up from the Near East. Things are picking up from Mesopotamia. Now, I know it's a mess of M's, isn't it? Minoan and Mycenaean and Mesopotamian, right? But your college students are hopefully going to pick all this up, right, as you learn it. Now, our statuette from the Walters is cast in bronze, and we haven't seen a lot of bronze casting yet, right? And the normal way to make a bronze is to formulate a cast somehow that you pour the molten bronze into, usually made out of another material. And eventually they develop a technique where you will carve it out of a soft material, build the cast around the soft material, get rid of the soft material, and pour in the bronze. I don't know exactly when they developed that idea, right? But they're working on something quite similar here. What we're going to find as we look more and more at Greek art is that one of the principal mediums that they work in, one of the principal art materials that they work in, is cast bronze. And we're going to start to see more and more of these in the few times they've survived. And we'll be talking more about them as we go on. This is a tiny statuette, 7 inches tall, right? So it's a piece of solid bronze. But they've made life-size bronze castings as well, and larger. And in Rome, we'll have the opportunity to see some colossal figures, some 12-foot tall Hercules figures, or a 30-foot tall Constantine in bronze, right? Because it's this wonderful material for working these things out. Okay, bronze there. In case you didn't know how to spell bronze. Moving forward in the 7th century, as we move our way toward the end of the 7th century, we start to get slightly more realistic. Slightly, right? I wouldn't call this realistic in any way. She certainly is a member of the big body parts club. She's got man hands, right? Or even bigger than that. She's wearing catcher's mitt, you know? And her face is a little on the awkward side, but compared to this figure, she's significantly more realistic. And furthermore, she's carved out of stone rather than cast in bronze. In fact, she's limestone. The increasing realism that we see in the figures as we move through the 7th century and into the 6th century, this increasing realism probably comes from contact with ancient Egypt. And we know for a fact that in the 7th, 6th century, ancient Greece had increasing amounts of contact with ancient Egypt. Part of the way we know this is that in Greek mythology, the earliest sculptor in Greek mythology is Daedalus. He's the father of Icarus, who molded wings from wax and flew too close to the sun. Well, according to Greek mythology, Daedalus, the sculptor, came from Egypt. So that's the root that they're certainly acknowledging the fact that sculpture is an Egyptian tradition for them. And if you look at our Koré figure, we'll talk more about what that means in a second. What are some similarities to this Egyptian work? Big feet. Other things? The hairstyle, yeah. She was more like she's wearing a bunch of sausage in this case, doesn't it? Like link sausages or something on her hair. But yeah, that very artificial hairstyle. Cornrows, exactly. And even I think even the way the arm bends across the chest it's too similar. Sorry, it's way more realistic than her, right? And in fact, the hand positions are closer to that, but that's because it's not in bronze. Bronze, you can do that, right? But,
like her arms were really long and
oh, I see. And here they're less long, but her hand is disproportionately large. Although her other arm, what about that other arm? How far down does that come? Quite a ways down, right? Now, these were originally painted as well, and you can see on her dress, if you look closely, squint a bit, you can see that there are more of those meander patterns that we saw before, right, working their way down the front of her dress, and this would originally have been painted, as would her belt. She is wearing a top, even though she has a nipple erection, but you can see the top of her blouse here with that cape over her shoulders, right? And the facial features are still sort of reminiscent of this, aren't they? The big almond eyes with all of that brow and eyelid drawn around them. But it's getting there, right? We're on the way. Yeah? So ancient Egypt seems to have some impact on the development of Greek sculpture. And we can't forget as well the fact that they had this other tradition that came from the Cyclades Islands of these grave marker figures, right? These were found in graves from the Cyclades Islands. Well, this Kore figure that we see on the right is also a grave marker. In the 7th century, when they started moving from grave marker pots to functional pottery, right, they replaced the pots on graves with these standing figures. Now, none of them are intended to be portraits. They're just grave markers. And the word Kore in Greek simply means young lady. That's all it means, right? So it's not a portrait of any one person. Oftentimes we don't even know whose grave they came from. But we do know that they were found in graveyards. And every now and then we can find one who we can say, yes, this was found on so-and-so's grave. But even then they're not meant to be portraits. They have this sort of standardized appearance, right? And obviously they would have marked graves of young women. The graves of young men would be marked by boys, right? And the word for young man is koros in Greek. So this is another grave marker figure. The one on your right, on the far right, is about 2.5 feet tall. The one on your left is over 6 feet tall. So they came in a range of sizes. And can you see how similar he is to ancient Greek or ancient Egyptian art as well? Even more so than the woman. Because you'll notice he's walking. Right? And you'll notice that more of this pose is directly translated out of various Egyptian examples. But there's obviously a few things that are different here, aren't there? Like what? He's naked, right? And actually, he's not entirely enough. He's got a little band around his neck, a little knot right here. Can you see that? And you can see right there, a knot, right? He's wearing a little band around his neck. So in many ways, it makes it kind of creepy erotic in a way, because he's not really fully undressed yet, right? He's still wearing that cute little band around his neck. But he's naked. And what's interesting is the woman isn't. And this is consistent in Greek sculpture, that the men are naked and the women aren't. Up until the 4th century BC, 320 or so BC, we get the first female nude. But for the most part, men are naked and women are not. Now why? For the Greeks, nakedness was a sign of perfection. It made you closer to the gods. And the Greeks are horribly misogynist as a culture. I don't know if I mentioned this to you guys before, but you know that in ancient Greek law, rape was a crime against the husband. Yeah, go figure, right? Who really suffered here, you know? And that is indicative of how sort of male-centric Greek society was. So this is why men get to enjoy the privilege in these statues of being shown naked, because that's perfection, and men are more perfect, at least in the early years. Eventually we will see images of naked women, but still throughout the history of Greek art, far more rare. Right? Not rare by any means, but far more rare than the men. Right? So he's a male grave marker as well, and both him and our Kore figures owe their basic form to Egyptian art are that the groups are having increasingly more contact with. I've got a bit of an animation here, and I think we'll quit. He's meant to be seen entirely in the round. Remember that Menkore here is not carved on the back, it was unfinished, and meant to be placed up against a wall. Well, since these were grave markers, they're meant to be seen from the sides and from the front. So this is up in New York as well. This is a gallery away from the pie. And I've got to go up there last spring and took some pictures. Right? You're meant to be seen on all sides. And the sculptor has paid as much attention to its view from the side and from the back as they have from the front. And in case you missed it, right, there he is from the back, where we can see this, the muscles are still kind of schematized, aren't they? Look at the rib cage, for example. It becomes a sort of wishbone shape, right, across here. Or the pelvic muscle, the top of the pelvic muscle becomes sort of a straight line. Even the muscles of the arms have a certain angularity. So look at this underneath the chest, sort of shape here. It's not really realistic, is it? But they've been looking a bit more, and it's certainly more realistic than the woman was, because we'll see our gift with people who are realistic. The muscles and the legs are still very similar to here, but if you look at the back, the shoulder blades are just these sensors, so they're not exactly in the right place, because it's still kind of silent, kind of geometric, you know? And I love this as a design. By the way, you took the scale right, they're taking the picture right. But I just noticed that. There's like a weird guy with this. I usually watch it, you don't see that. But there's that, it looks like a Star Trek logo, doesn't it? Over the back of his elbow. And so some of these are braced and put that together. But the hair is pretty terrific too, isn't it? And remember what Victoria's hair looked like. It's a cornrows, right? He's got it as well. And you'll notice though, if you look at the far left picture from the front, it really does hang on his head, like this pharaoh's head. As another of these signs of the similarity of the cross-pollination of these ideas from one to the other. Okay, that's 6:15. We'll continue with reading. Oh, one more announcement for next week. Remember how I said at the beginning of time of an email from SAT, how there was something going on Wednesday night? Yeah. And that there was something that our art students were doing, and you're probably thinking, but Mark, how are you going to help them do that? We have class, won't we? So we're going to have class for the first hour and a half until like just before 5 o'clock. And then I've got to be over there, so I will put some more stuff up online to make up for what we did. Because I know we're never going to get it. You know what I mean? So we only have 4 more weeks before we leave, right? We're going to cover everything, right? So next week, you can count on me not having class in the second half so that you can go over there. It'll be 350. That's right? Yeah. My father said that you are grading, and I'm not going to get